I'm gonna run through this real quick, and then there'll be a bunch of videos at the end of this that'll be you'll be able to find out everything that I'm saying here. Substantiates what I'm saying. Now, this is from a paper that I just did, and it's up on academia.edu. Now, it's and all claims are supported by experiments and photos. Now, what is ether? Ether, number one, ether is elementary particles like electrons that are free from their nuclear particles. There's no nucleuses with them. Ether particles can be at rest or they can be at motion, just like any other mass. They exist in matter, which is solid matter, or they exist just floating around in space, which we always thought was a vacuum. It's not, it's full of ether. Ether particles are hurled from the sun and all luminous bodies and sources. They're thrown away, out, and shot out as particles from everything. Now, ether in a vacuum. In a vacuum, ether is primarily moving energy little packets, like they're little tiny bar magnets, that are ejected from violent molecular shaking, like in the sun or any luminous source. And they are similar to electrons. They're most primary basic little particles. They're called ether. Ether particles manifest themselves as light and heat when they collide with complete matter. Complete matter is a nucleus with electrons in a cloud around it. These little particles come along, smash into them, shake them, like causing friction, which is heat, and then some of them bounce off or push other electrons off, and that is light. Now, the ether particles hit the cloud of electrons in matter and shake the electrons as heat or bounce off the cloud and dislodge the particles as light. Okay, that's that one. Now, ether in transit from the source in the vacuum still has mass, still has potential energy, and is dark energy and dark matter until it collides with matter that is complete, like the space station or Earth or the molecules that surround Earth in the atmosphere. And then it displays itself as heat and light from the actual impact into that complete matter. Now, ether particles are polar bits. They're little polarized bits of energy with a net negative. Now, this is the key. All matter, I believe, has a net negative ratio of approximately 1 to 1.0002, somewhere in that distant area. A very tiny additional negative charge. That's just a guess. However, it does appear that all matter has a slight extra negative mass, and that's what makes every single thing work. Anyway, and there's video on that, how all the particles in space keep away from each other because they're all negative, and then when they reach the powerful positive of Earth, they're pulled to Earth and pulled to massive bodies. They're pulled magnetically from a positive to that tiny little negative. It pulls it in. However, there is also a negative in all matter, so it keeps it away at a quantum distances. That's shown with the attractor magnets. Now, due to ether being negative particles, they avoid each other in the vacuum of space. They just stay away. The Earth and all complete matter have both positive and negative forces with a slight extra negative. It's slightly extra negative. That means that it's seen in tractor beam magnets pulling it in but keeping it away just a hair. And that's your quantum distances. This positive mass creates a strong attraction to negative ether, which is the electrons floating around, but a slight nuclear repulsion which creates the quantum distance fields. Ether in the Earth and all matter containing nuclei. What about that stuff? What's that kind of in the Earth ether? Ether particles are like bar magnets. They float around in the air, but they're also in fluids and gases and solids, and they're in all matter. If there's free extra ether particles, I have to have some extra ones, in that matter, it will conduct. And they will conduct in different degrees of resistance. They will resist that conduction up to a point, and sometimes they will just flow and cascade through there with very little resistance. Now, electrical conduction is particles of ether, which is inside of masses and so forth, being pushed through that matter, but it has to have excessive electrons that are they're mobile, and they're as if they were in like a hearty soup, and it pushes them depending how strong your voltage is and how big the diameter of the wire is, it creates a certain amount of conduction. All right? At extreme energies, almost anything will conduct. Extreme ether polar electrical pushing, on extreme energies, almost anything will conduct, as seen, with lightning. Now, what about ether and the magnetic fields? Well, ether is the fields in the air. You can see them, and I demonstrate those. There's fast ether and then there's slow ether. That's the key. Fast ether is emitted particles from light sources and from lasers and from heat and they're shooting out. And then there's slow ether, which is the slow ether is just sort of drifting around in the air, and you pick them up on your body as static electricity and so forth. Now, so you've got the fast ether light flies through the slow ether and polarizes it. It's simply in the air but not pushing, which is that slow ether. It's just sort of drifting around. So when those other ones go flying through there, it creates field patterns in that slow ether. The light pushes forward and polarizes the slow ether into disks that we see of quantum circles. And they're displayed with these little dots and bumps on the circles, and I show that very clearly. And those are at the positive negative junctions surrounding these polar circles, and they're seen very clearly in experiments. Now, ether inside solid matter. Electric current is ether pushed through wires and conductors of many different types. But if there are no free ether particles, which means there's no extra electrons, the matter is an insulator and it will not conduct or will not move. Now, but the electricity pushes forward and polarizes slow ether into disks or quantum circles that display with iron filings right around a wire, just exactly in the way I'm showing my other ones. And they display into patterns at the positive negative junctions. So you see them plus, 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 minus, plus, minus, plus, minus in a circle. And they're seen very clearly in every detail in the experiments. The quantum circles display around the wires, just as I'm showing when they are in the air. It's the same field. Now, ether in a liquid, ether is a liquid, and so is light. They're both liquids. They both have the characteristics of liquids. Ether displays the same identical characteristics as liquids. Liquid can speed up or slow down, and so can light, and photos prove it. I have photos showing that, and everybody knows it goes through water, it slows down. It goes through different mediums, it slows down. There is no speed limit to light. Now, in a Venturi, light becomes explosive, literally unbelievable, and I have the pictures of that, and we've done it very many times, and it becomes white and explosive, and it accelerates, and even Rod Warren, who was doing the experiments, told me at times he could hear it sizzle. All right, and accelerated ether can crash into slow ether and create a mini ether particle, and photons prove that. I got some kind of an error there, 219. Anyway, ether can crash into slow ether, a fast ether particle, and I show that. And it creates a little tiny mini ether particle, looks just like the big ones, only it's a little bitty one. And even the big ones are electrons, basically. What we're showing is an electron coming through the air, creating a field around it. So the pictures we're taking are almost nothing, and this is going to be a smaller particle coming through the air, creating a tinier little cone, and I'll show that clearly. Now, ether and sonoluminescence, that's a whole other issue. When you create a sonoluminescence, we're going to talk about this, ether will fill any void, it seems, instantly if there's a light source around. So what do I mean by a void? Well, a firecracker in water expands so rapidly that the outward force of the expansion exceeds the material from the explosion, and therefore it literally creates a tear in space. There's no material to fill that tear. So what happens is the it creates a void, and that collapses quickly. But what happens with the void is when a cavity in space is made, as with that firecracker, if there's not enough matter, or the ether is in the expanding cavity, the excess cavity will fill with electrons that are ether, and that's all they are, is electrons. The electrons are just literally raw energy, and as the thing collapses, it creates unbelievable millions of degrees temperature, because it's nothing more than raw energy, raw electrons. That's all it is. Now, here's my conclusions. Light is particles. It's called ether. The particles are all net negative, but they're only slightly net negative. But they're all net negative. Particles are dark in space, vacuum. When they're in the vacuum of space, they're just dark. You can't see them. They're doing nothing. They're all negative, so they stay away from each other. And that's all that's out there, because the masses collect in balls, like the Earth and so forth. Now, they can be accelerated and slowed down, and I proved they can be divided. And electricity uses the same ether particles, and only they're pushing them through a wire. The nuclear core, which means the nucleus of complete matter, which contains the nucleuses, has a strong positive, but it also has a net negative. So the positive is just a little less than a negative. So it pulls in all negative particles, but because there's a little extra negative, it keeps all the negatives that are coming in as the electrons at a certain quantum distance. And then those first orbital ones will keep the next ones at a quantum distance from them. And then they will display out in a pattern, which I show very clearly in the disks. And it creates attraction to all other matter and slight repulsion of negative ether particles, which keeps the quantum distance. So this shows quantum. So I need to do more work on this, and I need other people to look into this, but it does seem to satisfy everything that I can find about universality so far. And then I have all these different videos, and if you want to just click on them here, boom, you can go in there. And now here's where you see all those little dots that I talk about. You see all the little dots? Those are the fields from the particle shooting out through, and at the head of the particle they create that field displaying the different ether particles, plus minus plus minus plus minus, in circles, and they're all the same. So, and then I have a ton of other videos that go along with this. So I guess that's going to be up to you to do a little research, but I think I've made a strong case for the fact that these are fields, magnetic fields, and they're created by particles going through ether. So, Mudfossil University, get up there, subscribe, click the bell, make sure you get to watch everything that we do, because it's all reality, and it's all substantial reality. It's not just guessing. We're going to show you fakes, pictures of things. This is all quite serious and quite real. All right, God bless you all. Thank you, my friends. Bye. Okay, there's a backstory to everything, and I noticed pictures that Rod Warren was displaying on the internet, and I got a hold of him, and he's the one that came up with the Venturi slit experiments and these fabulous photos. So I'm using his photos, and I want to make sure it's understood that he came up with the Venturi slit, and these are his photos. Alright, everybody's seen this kind of a magnetic field. These are little iron filings, and they follow the field. They're called magnetic lines of flux. Really what you're seeing here is little tiny pieces of wire, actually, that are polarized. So you got plus minus, plus minus, plus minus. So they make that pattern by being polarized in that plus minus, plus minus, plus minus pattern, and they look like they're creating one specific wire in that field. Alright, you saw that magnetic field around a bar magnet. Well, when electricity travels through a wire, it sets up the identical same kind of a field, which is a circular pattern. And what it really does, you don't see it, but it's making a plus minus plus minus plus minus along the line of that electric particle moving through, because that electric particle, what it does, it creates like a shock wave around it, and that's what we're seeing here. And they come in exact different distances called quantum, and I'll show you how I can make that statement. Alright, I've gone over this 100 times, so I'm going to go over it kind of quickly, but there's an accelerator that we created, and I'm going to show you where to find these videos on my site on Mudfossil University. But they're coming through the accelerator at extremely high velocity, and if you look, you can see a little tiny ray coming out to each one of these disks, and the head of the disk has this pattern on it with all these little dots. That's just like the circle we just saw on the wire and around the magnet, and these are the particles that are in the air. This is ether in the air, and they are magnetic particles that exist in the air. That's just it. That's the way it is. And when powerful light or electricity or anything that's moving in an electric field, it induces this kind of a magnetic polarity to the ether. So you get plus minus plus minus plus minus, see, plus minus plus minus, and that almost looks like that Fibonacci pattern. So it's the particle, and around that particle is this field. And this is not understood whatsoever, and they don't understand the nature of matter either, or of the electrons, or of the nucleus, or of neutrons. There is no neutrons. So look at this, and then look at my claims and how I can make those claims, and then you'll see the reality of the situation. Light is totally misunderstood. Okay, this is from X-Persian Alien X, and this is about the tether. And I'm going to explain to you what they are seeing here, which are light disks. And the thing that you want to take into account is that just as the sun comes up, that is when these disks appear, because that's when they're going to be illuminated. Now listen.
Columbia and the satellite now 77 nautical miles apart.
Now you can see them just barely in the back.
Reporting that the crew can see the tether and see the satellite. It's beautiful.
Now you see the particles. They're just coming into sunlight now.
This view showing...
I don't know what to say.
The satellite. Again, just moving into sunrise.
There's the key right there. Now I'm going to stop it, because just moving into sunrise, that is why they're seeing all the particles. The sunlight is illuminating the actual particles by sending down the ether that creates the magnetic fields around the particles. That's what they're seeing. And when when the sunlight comes down, it provides the ether that presents the magnetic field of these particles. Now, he just said we're just coming into sunrise. They try to focus in and out, in and out, in and out, every which way. The particles are going every other direction. That means that they're coming from outer space, they're coming from the sun, they're coming from the earth, they're coming from everywhere. Now just watch and listen.
81 nautical miles now from Columbia.
Those are exactly what I see in the light rays when I show the stuff. See them coming flying down? Primarily they're coming out of this area down in this way, I believe. Some will come from here, some will come from over there, but alright, see those coming through there? That's just... Now at this point they don't know what to say, okay, and then they've come out of it. Now, we're going to go into some, well, let it go a little further and you'll see. Now, John Glenn.
You guys getting the image?
Franklin, we see a long line, a couple of star-like things, and a lot of things swimming in the foreground. Can you describe what you're seeing?
No.
Well, the long line is a tether, and there's a little bit of debris that kind of flies with us, and it's illuminated by the sun at such low angle. So there's a lot of stray light. And
All right, I'm not going to bother. He's going to just say, oh, they're particles, they're just floating around, it's nothing. No, they're not. They are literally magnetic fields surrounding the particles that are in space, and those magnetic fields are made up by the ether, which is being sent down by the sun to allow those fields to be seen. That's what we're seeing. All right, I just want to mention this. When we do the experiments with light, and you can see all these fabulous shots that we have showing the light discs, that has to be done with a certain lighting as well, where there's enough light to expose the discs, but not enough light to obscure the discs. Now, and this is be obvious as he's talking about, because he's coming into sunlight, so there's not enough light, or there's enough light coming from the sun to illuminate these discs in this like certain angle, but as it approaches more and they get flooded more, he loses them. So listen to what he says.
This Friendship 7 broadcasting in the blind. Sunrise has come up behind in the periscope. It was brilliant in the scope, a brilliant red as it approached the horizon and came up. And just as I looked back up out the window, I had literally thousands of small luminous particles swirling around the capsule and going away from me at maybe 3 to 5 miles per hour. Now that I am out in the bright sun, they seem to have disappeared. It was just as the sun was coming up.
That's the key. That's the key to the whole thing. And that is, the sunlight itself is sending down the ether. The ether is being polarized by some other particles that are going through that ether and creating magnetic fields, which I have shown in many shots. Hopefully this will illuminate things. Now, my contention is that from the sun, particles are shaken so violently that they spin off into space. Those are called ether. They're particles that are like electronish particles, tiny particles. They have no nucleuses. Now, they float through space, and they don't go any special speed. There's no special fast or slow out there. They go with whatever speed they want to. And they appear to create this spinning effect, but what I believe is it's the particle moving through the ether, and what you see is the polarized ether, plus minus, of all these little particles, and they are particles, and they fill the void of space, and they collect near areas where there is a lot of illumination. That's obvious. They're going to be spitting them out here. It's going to be brighter here, which means there's going to be more ether. That's the way it works. So these particles come off here, spinning towards space, towards Earth, and they hit the Earth in the ionosphere and so forth, and they become illuminated. They create magnetic fields, let me put it that way. But they are not illuminated except on the occasion where you are in like a darkness area and coming into a brightness area, and the sun is hitting the particles in the dark area. Okay, it's just skimming past. You're just coming into sunlight. That sunlight is coming here and it's hitting in the darkness area, and they become illuminated because the magnetic fields brighten right up. And that's what John Glenn was seeing, and that's what the Tether incident was. Both of them said, hey, the sun's just coming up. Guess what we're seeing? And then it goes away because they become inundated with light and they lose their luminescence because there is no darkness for them to luminesce from. That's the nature of light. It's particles, and it's dark energy and dark matter in the vacuum of space. They're particles, they're energy, they're moving around out here. That's the way it works. And when they get sucked to the Earth, they don't necessarily come in all the same speed. That's nonsense. They get sucked to the Earth, and they have to go a certain velocity on Earth to maintain movement, which is light. Or under that, it's sound and that sort of stuff. Electricity is a form of light. It's confined within matter. It creates a magnetic field. Same thing.